In the quiet suburbs of Ironwood Valley, just miles away from the buzzing heart of Washington, D.C., a storm was about to break, but no one knew it yet. To most, it seemed like any other peaceful evening. Neighbors were having quiet dinners. The wind rustled softly through the trees, and the lights in the fancy mansions cast a warm glow on the empty streets. But inside one of these estates, a storm was brewing, one that would change everything for those who dared to stand in its way. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in history, had built a fortress, something few knew about. Beneath the polished marble floors, behind the lush garden hedges, and within the walls of her sprawling mansion, Karoline had been preparing for this moment. The Mexican cartel thought they were going to make an easy example of her, a woman too inexperienced and too exposed to be anything more than a target. They couldn't have been more wrong. Karoline had faced bigger battles in her career, from the harsh lights of the White House press room to navigating the ruthless world of politics. This, however, was different. This time, the stakes were her life, and she wasn't going down without a fight. As her phone buzzed, Karoline's calm, calculating demeanor betrayed nothing of the storm now on the horizon. Mexican cartel inbound, 30 minutes away. Her heart skipped a beat, but only for a moment. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, reading the message with laser precision. Her mind began to work as it always had, strategically, calculating her next move. She wasn't just a White House press secretary. She was a force in her own right, prepared for the impossible. The mansion wasn't just a symbol of her success in Washington. It was her ultimate defense, a sanctuary equipped with every piece of technology and strategy she could muster to keep herself safe. From the outside, it appeared to be a grand home with large windows, sleek marble floors, and rooms full of luxurious furniture. But behind the scenes, it was a fortress designed to withstand attacks from the most dangerous forces in the world. It wasn't by accident. Every inch of the mansion had been carefully planned with military precision. Bulletproof windows, state-of-the-art surveillance, and hidden security systems that would make any intruder think twice before approaching. And tonight, those systems would be put to the ultimate test. Karoline had seen threats like this before, but this was the first time the threat was coming directly to her doorstep. Her role as the face of the president's anti-cartel policies had earned her the wrath of some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. But Karoline was no stranger to pressure. She had fought off political attacks, media conspiracies, and now she would face down the very cartels that sought to destabilize the country. As she walked through the hallway of the mansion, her mind ran through every detail: the motion sensors, the fortified gates, the hidden cameras that fed live footage of every corner of the estate. No one, not even the cartel, would breach these defenses. She had prepared for this moment since the day she stepped into the White House. With her FBI contacts warning, the cartel had sent a message. This wasn't just an attack on her, it was an attack on the president's policies, an attempt to weaken the government's resolve. But Karoline wasn't about to let that happen. She would turn the tables, using their own methods against them. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the marble tiles as she made her way to the control room hidden behind an elegant wall-mounted painting. A gentle press, and the wall slid open, revealing the technology that would make her invincible. The control room was lined with monitors, all feeding live footage of every part of the mansion, from the front gates to the backyard. Every movement, every sound was captured, analyzed, and logged. Karoline's fingers flew across the keyboard as she activated the security systems, locking down the mansion and preparing for what was to come. On the screens, she watched the black SUVs move closer, headlights dimmed to avoid detection. Her heart didn't race. Her mind was already ahead of the game, calculating the moves she would make to outsmart the cartel. A sense of quiet tension filled the room as she saw the vehicles come to a halt half a mile away. The cartel had arrived. The night was silent, except for the faint hum of the mansion's defense systems kicking into gear. Karoline's eyes scanned the screens, analyzing the movements of the cartel's operatives. She could make out the silhouettes of men stepping out of the vehicles, their weapons hidden under dark jackets, their movements deliberate, professional. At the forefront, she saw him, Felix Reyes, the cartel boss. She had seen his name in countless intelligence briefings. He was the kind of man who struck fear into even the most hardened criminals. And he was coming for her. His eyes were cold, his hands stained with blood, and he thought this mission would be no different than any other. He was wrong. Felix ordered his men to split into 3 groups. One would head toward the front gates, armed with knives and silenced pistols. Another would circle around the back, planting explosives to create a breach. The third would stay close to the vehicles, ready to support or retreat. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each step calculated, each decision made with the confidence of men who believed they were invisible. But Karoline had been preparing for this exact moment for months. Her team was in position, and every system was armed. The first group of cartel assassins reached the front gate, where they began to cut through the steel bars with a metal cutter. The scraping noise echoed in the stillness of the night, but Karoline wasn't worried. She had anticipated this move. As they worked, she activated her first trap, a silent motion sensor buried beneath the earth. On her screen, a red light blinked, signaling that they were already in range. She smiled, a faint but satisfied curve of her lips. She had them now. From the vantage point of her hidden control room, Karoline could see everything. She watched the assassins struggle with their task, unaware that they were already walking straight into her carefully laid plans. She wasn't just sitting back, waiting to be attacked. No, Caroline Leavitt was on the offensive, taking charge of the situation with the calm precision of a seasoned strategist. The cartel had no idea what was coming for them, and as Felix led his men toward what he thought would be an easy victory, Karoline prepared to give them a taste of their own failure. They had underestimated her, and they would pay the price for it. Felix and his team advanced, their footfalls quick and calculated, the silence of the night only broken by the crunch of gravel underfoot. They thought they were undetected, cloaked in the cover of darkness. They believed that the mansion they approached was nothing more than the home of a politician, an easy target for a swift strike to make a statement. But what they didn't know was that Karoline Leavitt had anticipated this moment from the very first day she stepped into the White House. Every detail had been accounted for, every angle calculated. As Felix and his men neared the mansion's high steel gates, the first group of assassins began working quickly, pulling out heavy metal cutters, the blades grating against the fence. They thought the path was clear, the security merely an afterthought in the middle of a peaceful neighborhood, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Karoline sat back in the control room, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as she watched every move unfold. The moment the men began to cut through the gate, she initiated the first line of defense. A barely audible hum filled the air as the motion sensors buried under the ground came to life, picking up the cartel's every movement. The men at the gate were too busy with their task to notice the faint red light flashing on Karoline's screen, signaling that the trap had been triggered. Her eyes gleamed with a quiet satisfaction. Felix's men were now in her world, a world where every step they took was being monitored, where every move they made was already anticipated, and they had no idea just how far ahead she was. She pressed a button, sending a signal to the first line of security, and within moments a blinding flash of light erupted from the mansion's exterior. The front gates, which had appeared vulnerable only moments ago, were suddenly enveloped in a harsh, searing light. Felix's men stumbled backward, shielding their eyes as weapons clattered to the ground. They fumbled in the chaos, completely disoriented by the sudden attack. Felix, still outside the blinding light, barked orders into his radio, trying to regain control. But he was no longer in charge. Karoline watched calmly as her first wave of defense took effect. The surprise, the confusion, was all hers now. She turned her attention to the second group, the men moving toward the backyard to plant explosives. They were more methodical, more cautious, aware that they had to breach the estate in a way that wouldn't alert anyone too soon. But Karoline had already prepared for this. Through her hidden surveillance system, she could see them moving toward the back fence, carrying small explosives in their hands. As they approached, Karoline activated a secondary system that flooded the backyard with a high-pitched siren sound, designed to strike fear into anyone hearing it. It was loud, jarring, and disorienting. The cartel members froze, looking around in confusion, their hearts pounding in their chests. For a moment, they thought they were surrounded. It was a calculated psychological move, throw them off their rhythm, make them question every decision. Fear is the weapon that breaks even the strongest. Felix, watching from the front yard, growled into his walkie-talkie, trying to regain control of the situation. But there was no regaining control now. His team was falling apart before his eyes. Each move they made, every step they took, was being countered by Karoline's strategy. It wasn't just about traps and tech. It was about taking the initiative, making the cartel question their every move. Karoline was playing them like a master chess player, each piece strategically placed, each trap designed to force them into making a mistake. And mistakes were what she needed. As the siren blared, the men in the backyard hesitated, looking around nervously. It was enough of a delay for Karoline to activate the next phase of her plan. From hidden speakers placed around the yard, she triggered the next trap. A loud, shrill alarm blared through the trees, echoing off the walls and fences, so deafening it would make anyone think law enforcement was descending on the estate. The cartel members, now in full panic mode, spun around, weapons raised, eyes darting through the night for any sign of movement. They were cornered in their own minds, and Karoline was the one controlling it all. The tension built in the mansion's control room. Karoline felt the calm assurance that came from knowing she was always one step ahead. But as she scanned the surveillance footage, she knew the battle wasn't over yet. Felix's team was faltering, but there was still one more group, the ones lurking by the vehicles, poised to back up the others if needed. She had to be ready for anything. As Felix rallied his remaining operatives, Karoline's mind raced. She needed to break their confidence completely. Her fingers moved over the console, typing commands that would set her final trap into motion. The men in the front yard, those who had been momentarily blinded by the light, were trying to regroup. They were coming for the mansion's bulletproof glass doors, ready to breach, ready to break through and make their mark. But Karoline had already prepared for that too. She didn't need brute force. She had something far more effective. With a few keystrokes, she armed the glass door with a release of nerve gas, just enough to incapacitate, but not to kill. The first man slammed his boot into the door, trying to crack it open, but he was met with a sudden, sharp hiss. The gas sprayed in an even mist, filling the air around the doorframe. The man stumbled back, coughing violently as the gas overwhelmed him. His body went limp, and he crumpled to the ground. The others tried to react, but it was too late. One by one they fell, their bodies racked by dizziness and confusion, unable to comprehend what was happening. The cartel's plan was falling apart before their eyes. Felix, seething with rage, ordered a retreat, but there would be no retreat tonight. Karoline had already jammed all of their communications, isolating each of them from the others. They had no support, no way of knowing what was happening to their comrades. Felix's radio crackled with static as he tried to call for backup, but Karoline had already cut that off. His confidence, which had been so unshakable when they first arrived, was now shattered. He was just another man, trapped in a mansion that wasn't his, facing a woman who had outplayed him at every turn. For a moment, Felix didn't know whether to fight or to flee. He looked around, his eyes searching for a way out, but there was no escape. Karoline had anticipated everything. She had known he would try to breach the gates, knew he would attempt to overpower her defenses, and she had designed her mansion to stop him at every turn. She had turned the tables on him, and now he was the one on the defensive. Felix was trapped, just like the rest of his team. The cartel had come for her, but it was they who were now being hunted. Felix paced nervously in the yard, his eyes darting back and forth between the front gates and his scattered, fallen team. The initial confidence that had led him here, the arrogance of believing this would be another simple mission, was rapidly dissolving. The sounds of his men struggling, the flashes of light, the nerve gas traps. It was all too much. He knew Caroline Leavitt wasn't just another politician, but he never imagined she could be this prepared. His hand clenched around his walkie-talkie, but he quickly dropped it as the static continued to rage in his ears. There was no way to call for backup, no way to get his men coordinated. His team, once so confident and efficient, was now scattered and disoriented, slowly being picked off by traps they hadn't even seen coming. The brief moments of chaos, the sirens blaring, the smoke screens, had shattered their composure. Felix's mind raced, each thought spiraling faster than the last. He barked orders to his men, trying to regain control, but it was clear that things were falling apart. In the back of his mind, a nagging realization began to settle in. They were up against more than just a high-tech mansion. They were up against a mind that was every bit as dangerous as the cartel itself. He looked at the few remaining men around him, all of them hesitant, unsure of what to do next. The fear in their eyes, the unease in their movements, it was a telltale sign that the mission was slipping away from them. It was then that Felix made a snap decision. They had to regroup, reinforce, and push through. But where they'd expected an easy victory, they had found nothing but a deadly web of traps, a maze of technology and strategy that had turned their every move into a mistake. In the mansion, Caroline watched it all unfold, her gaze fixed on the live feeds as Felix's confidence crumbled. She could feel the power shift. She had seized control of the narrative, turned it into a game she was destined to win. As her team, Mark, Leah, and James were on standby, ready to intervene if necessary, Caroline knew this was her moment to further dismantle the cartel's plan. She had laid the perfect trap, lured them in with precision, and now it was time to strike again. She gave a subtle nod to James, who was monitoring the communications jamming device. With a quiet hum, he flipped the switch, cutting all remaining communication between the cartel's forces. Felix and his men were now completely isolated, without any way of knowing what was happening with the rest of their team. The disarray was complete. Felix's men had already lost their bearings, and now, in their isolation, they were growing more desperate. The technology that had seemed like a mere inconvenience to them just hours before was now a nightmare. Every move they made was blocked, every plan foiled. As they scrambled to regain their bearings, Caroline decided it was time for the final move. She pressed a button on the console, activating the mansion's hidden defense mechanisms. A series of loud, screeching sirens went off from hidden speakers, reverberating through the estate. The noise was disorienting, almost deafening. It was designed to disorient the enemy, to push them to the edge of panic, to make them question everything they thought they knew. The sirens were followed by the sound of helicopters, loud, close, relentless, blaring through the outdoor speakers, designed to mimic an FBI raid. It was the perfect psychological weapon, hitting them at their most vulnerable, their sense of control. The cartel's remaining operatives froze in place. They looked around, their eyes wide, their hands fumbling for their weapons. What they hadn't realized was that every step they took had been anticipated, every decision manipulated by Caroline's foresight. The plan they had crafted, the raid they thought would bring them victory, had instead turned into their undoing. It wasn't just the physical traps that were working against them. It was their own fear, their own growing realization that they were fighting something far beyond their understanding. Felix, watching his men falter, could do nothing but growl under his breath, his frustration mounting as he realized how far behind the curve he had fallen. He had expected resistance, but he had never anticipated a battle like this. He could feel his resolve beginning to crack, but he refused to give up. "Push forward," he shouted to his remaining men. "We can't back down now." But Caroline knew this wasn't about brute strength, it was about strategy. And the cartel was already too disorganized, too rattled. They had underestimated her and the resources at her disposal, resources that were far more formidable than any cartel hit squad. Her mansion was more than just a sanctuary, it was a weapon. Every security measure, every hidden trap, Every psychological ploy had been designed to break them, and now the final trap was about to close. As Felix barked his orders, trying to rally his men, Karoline silently activated the next phase of the defense grid. Without warning, the motion sensors in the backyard flared to life, and the hidden steel panels along the outer wall slid shut, sealing off any escape routes for the remaining cartel members. The final barricade was in place, and there was nowhere left to run. Felix, desperate, sprinted to the edge of the yard, hoping to break through, but found himself met by an unyielding wall of steel. He banged his fist against it, frustration boiling over. There was no exit, no way out. The cartel had been caught in a trap of their own making, each misstep leading them deeper into Karoline's plan. She had taken them on a mental journey, a trap they hadn't seen coming, and now they were completely exposed. The only thing left for Felix and his men was surrender. But Karoline wasn't going to give them that luxury. She turned to her team, her mind already calculating the next steps. They had done their job, but this battle wasn't over yet. There were still the vehicles in the front yard, still the final wave of cartel reinforcements to deal with. And as Felix and his men stood, trapped and helpless, Karoline knew they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. Underestimating her had been their biggest mistake. The cartel's fate was sealed, and the game was hers. In the control room, Mark, Leah, and James stood at attention, ready to move. The jamming was in place, the traps fully activated, and now they were just waiting for the final wave to approach. But it didn't come. Instead, a distant rumble echoed through the mansion's surveillance system. Karoline's eyes sharpened. She knew what that sound meant. Reinforcements were on their way, but this wasn't just a backup, it was the real threat. She turned to her team, her voice cold and decisive. "They're bringing in the big guns," she said, eyes never leaving the screen. The final group was on the move, but this time it wasn't just about overwhelming numbers. It was about a new, more dangerous wave of cartel forces, armed with heavy weapons and ready to breach the last line of defense. But Karoline wasn't worried. The mansion was more than ready for this challenge. They had come to her doorstep expecting to take her down, but instead they had walked into their own demise. The stakes had shifted, and now the real battle was about to begin. As the vehicles neared, Karoline's fingers hovered over the controls, ready to launch the final stages of her plan. They wanted to test her. She would give them a lesson they would never forget. The mansion wasn't just her home, it was her battlefield, and she had just turned the tide. This time, the cartel wouldn't stand a chance. Karoline's fingers hovered above the console, poised to activate the next stage of her defense system as the sound of the approaching vehicles grew louder. Felix and his men were regrouping, but Karoline knew that their earlier failures had already shattered their confidence. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside the mansion, but they were about to learn the hard way. The faint glow of the surveillance screens illuminated her face as she studied the movements of the incoming cartel reinforcements. They thought they had a chance to turn the tide, but they were stepping into a trap they couldn't even comprehend. The convoy of SUVs neared the mansion, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Karoline watched their every move, tracking them as they slowed to a halt at the edge of the property. From her vantage point, she could see the men stepping out, eyes scanning the estate for any signs of life. But what they didn't realize was that the moment they stepped onto the grounds, they would be entering her domain, and this time there would be no escape. Karoline's team was already in motion, Mark behind the wheel of their silver SUV, his grip tight on the steering wheel. He had been with her from the very beginning, a trusted ally who had seen her through the worst of the White House media storms, and now he was her protector. Leah, the brilliant tech engineer, sat beside him, her fingers flying across her laptop as she worked to hack into the traffic system to give them an edge. In the back seat, James, the ex-military tactical expert, checked his gear, adjusting his gun and preparing for whatever came next. They had all been briefed, and they knew what was at stake. They weren't just there to help Karoline, they were there to win. The silver SUV cruised down the dark road, the headlights off to stay undetected, and Mark's eyes never left the rearview mirror. He could feel the tension in the air, the sense of urgency that seemed to crackle through the stillness of the night. 2 minutes, Mark muttered, his voice low and steady as he pushed the pedal to the metal. We're almost there. Laia glanced up from her laptop, her eyes flickering with concentration. She had been tracking the cartel's movements for hours, feeding data to Mark and James. The vehicles were in position, and she knew it was time to make her move. They've set up at the front, she reported. Group 1 is circling around the side to breach the backyard. They're not wasting any time. James, his jaw set in grim determination, checked his weapon one last time. They're getting cocky, he said, his voice filled with the calm confidence that only came from years of military experience. Let's make them regret it. The team was ready. They knew what was coming, and they were prepared to meet it head-on. Karoline, still in the control room, pressed a button on her console, and the mansion's security systems hummed to life. The screens flickered as the backup generators kicked in, providing additional power to the mansion's fortifications. She wasn't just waiting for them to make their move, she was making hers. Felix, who had been trying to rally his men for one final push, watched as the vehicles in the front yard began to unload. He knew this was his last chance. If they couldn't breach the mansion now, they would never get another shot. His hands gripped the walkie-talkie tighter, his orders sharp and urgent as he directed his team to take their positions. "Move in," he barked. "We hit her with everything we've got. No more mistakes. We breach now." His team moved quickly, slipping between the shadows, but Karoline was already a step ahead. The mansion's exterior lights flickered, and without warning, a high-pitched alarm sounded, piercing the night air. Felix's men stopped dead in their tracks, disoriented by the blaring noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They fumbled for their weapons, trying to steady themselves, but the sirens only grew louder, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of chaos. The team was rattled. They had expected to be the hunters, but now they were the prey. The darkness that had once been their ally was now their enemy. Karoline, watching from the control room, couldn't help but smirk as she saw Felix's team begin to falter. It was the moment she had been waiting for. Laia, her fingers flying across the keyboard, activated the next phase of the mansion's defense grid. A series of lights mounted along the perimeter of the estate flared to life, flooding the front yard and backyard with blinding white light. The cartel members, caught in the open, staggered back, their vision assaulted by the sudden onslaught. Felix's men, struggling to adjust to the sudden brightness, found themselves at a disadvantage. They had no cover, no place to hide. It was as if the mansion had become a battlefield, the lights and sirens a constant reminder that they were outmatched. Karoline's team, moving swiftly and quietly, took their positions at the designated points. Mark, Laia, and James were ready to intercept. They knew the cartel's next move would be crucial. They had to make it count. Felix, who had been barking orders into his walkie-talkie, cursed under his breath. He had hoped the blinding lights would be a temporary distraction, but they were now a permanent fixture, disorienting his men and making it nearly impossible to advance. He didn't have much time. The pressure was mounting. "We move on her position," he shouted. "We breach the doors, no hesitation." His team responded, but their movements were sluggish, hesitant. It was clear that the control they once had was slipping through their fingers. Felix's eyes darted around, scanning for any signs of movement, any weaknesses in the mansion's defenses, but there were none. Karoline had anticipated every move, and now the only thing left to do was to hold the line and wait for her team to strike. James, watching through his thermal glasses, spotted the movement at the front gate. "They're trying to breach the door," he said calmly, raising his weapon and checking the perimeter. He turned to Karoline. "We should jam their communications again. They won't know what hit them." Karoline gave a sharp nod, signaling Laia to activate the jamming system once more. The silence that followed was deafening. Felix and his men, relying on their radios to coordinate their attack, were now completely cut off from each other. They couldn't communicate. They couldn't plan. They were blind. Karoline's team, on the other hand, had all the information they needed. They knew exactly where each cartel member was, what they were doing, and how to stop them. Karoline's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on the estate. The cartel was running out of options. With no communication, no backup, and no way to advance, they were effectively trapped. Felix's frustration boiled over as he watched his men struggle to regain their footing. They had been on the offensive, but now they were on the defensive, unsure of how to proceed. His jaw clenched in anger. He couldn't let it end like this, not after everything they had planned. But it was too late. Karoline had already won. She turned to her team, a faint smile crossing her face as she saw the enemy in disarray. "They've lost," she said, her voice quiet but filled with satisfaction. "Now it's time to finish it." With a single press of a button, the final phase of the mansion's security system was activated. From the walls surrounding the estate, hidden steel panels slid into place, locking down every exit and trapping the remaining cartel members inside. It was over. Felix stood in the front yard, completely surrounded by Karoline's defenses. He looked around, his eyes wild with panic, but there was nowhere to go. The mansion had become an impenetrable fortress. His men were scattered, incapacitated by the traps, and there was no one left to help him. The once dominant cartel leader, who had come to Washington with the goal of making a statement, was now nothing more than a trapped animal, caught in the very web Karoline had spun for him. The cartel had underestimated her, and now they would pay the price. As the first responders, the police and FBI, arrived, Karoline turned away from the control room screen and glanced at her team. They had done their job. The battle was over. The mansion was no longer just a place of refuge. It was a symbol of Karoline's unyielding will and strategic genius. She had not only defended herself from the cartel's attack, but she had turned the tables, using their own tactics against them. The cartel had come for her, but in the end it was Karoline who had triumphed. The mansion, now secured and surrounded by law enforcement, was a testament to her foresight, her planning, and her strength. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a fortress, a beacon of resilience and power, and the cartel would never forget it. The sun had barely started to rise, casting a muted glow over the still mansion, now teeming with law enforcement. The front yard, once a battleground, had transformed into a secure zone, surrounded by police vehicles and FBI agents methodically combing through the wreckage. Karoline stood near the large broken window of the mansion's main hall, her eyes fixed on the unfolding scene outside. The sense of victory was undeniable, but there was no time for celebration. Not yet. They had neutralized the cartel's attack, yes, but she knew better than to rest on her laurels. As the agents in the yard continued their work, collecting evidence, securing the perimeter, and rounding up the remaining cartel members, Karoline's mind shifted to the next phase. The media, the press conference, the political ramifications of what had just transpired. Her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She reached for it, her fingers brushing the screen to reveal a message from Sarah Martinez, the special agent overseeing the aftermath. "Karoline, the final sweep is nearly complete. The backyard is secure. Your mansion's defenses are holding. We've got all but 2 of the cartel members in custody. We need to wrap up the media response and bring you in for debriefing. I'll be in touch soon." Karoline read the message and set the phone down, turning to her team, who were gathered in the center of the room, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and cautious anticipation. Mark, Leah, and James had performed flawlessly, each one an integral part of the strategy that had saved her life and dismantled the cartel's operation. Their work wasn't done, though. "All right, team," Karoline said, her voice firm and steady as always. "We've accomplished the mission, but now it's time to turn this into something bigger. The media is going to want answers, and I'm going to give them the story they never expected. I want us to be ready. Leah, make sure all tech systems are cleared. Check every trap and every monitoring system. We need to be able to control the narrative when the cameras arrive. Mark, prepare yourself. The press is going to want access to me, and there's going to be a swarm of questions. You know how these things go. I need you to keep them focused." Karoline paused, turning her gaze toward James, who was quietly checking his gear. "James, make sure we have all exits secured. The last thing we want is for someone to slip through the cracks. If the cartel tries anything, even after all this, I want them to know they will never get through here again." Her team nodded in unison, understanding the weight of what she was asking. With the team in motion, Karoline felt a cool wave of determination wash over her. She wasn't just going to face the media, she was going to use this moment as an opportunity to solidify her position. This wasn't just about surviving a cartel raid, it was about taking that victory and turning it into a political and personal statement. The media would question her, they would doubt her methods and the security setup. She knew that would happen. She was ready. The mansion, once just a home, was now a symbol. It had been designed with cutting-edge technology, fortified defenses, and meticulous planning. Every move the cartel had made was anticipated. Every step they took counted. But the media, like so many, would focus on the spectacle. They would scrutinize, question, and speculate. The reporters outside were already gathering, cameras clicking, microphones poised, the usual frenzy of anticipation hanging in the air. Karoline knew what was coming next. The press would swarm, eager for details, hungry for any hint of weakness or vulnerability. But there would be none. This was her moment to make her mark. She took one last look around the mansion, her sharp eyes taking in the reinforced walls, the high-tech surveillance systems, the sleek design of her fortress. It wasn't just a residence anymore. It was a statement. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her senior advisor at the White House. "The president is watching. He's been briefed. This could be your moment to push the anti-cartel agenda." Karoline's fingers tightened around the phone, her resolve hardening. She was more than just a press secretary. She was the face of a new era in the fight against cartel violence. This attack had been personal, yes, but now it would fuel the push for stronger anti-cartel laws. Outside, the reporters grew restless, their chatter filling the air. Karoline's team moved efficiently, making their final adjustments. Mark double-checked the security protocols, ensuring that everything was in place and no loose ends remained. James made a last sweep of the property, keeping a close eye on the perimeter, while Laya ran diagnostics on the mansion's tech, ensuring that all surveillance and communication systems were fully operational. As the minutes ticked by, Karoline could feel the weight of the moment settling in. She was ready. The door to the mansion creaked open, and Karoline walked toward the waiting crowd of reporters with a calm, unwavering stride. The sight of her standing tall at the threshold, unscathed, with the debris of the night's chaos still fresh in the background, sent a ripple of anticipation through the crowd. The cameras snapped to attention. The press conference was about to begin, and Karoline was prepared to take control of the narrative. She stepped to the podium, her eyes sweeping over the gathered media. The flashes of the cameras were blinding, but she remained unfazed. She could already feel the weight of their scrutiny, but it didn't matter. This was where she thrived. This was where she was in her element. The first question came, shouted from the crowd. "How did you manage to survive such a brutal attack? Was this your personal security plan, or something the government put together for you?" Karoline's lips curled into a faint smile as she took a deep breath. This wasn't about survival. This was about strategy, preparation, and knowing the enemy's moves before they make them. The mansion's security wasn't just put together overnight. It's been built over years of experience in handling the press, handling pressure, and most importantly, handling threats. The cartel underestimated me, and that was their mistake. This mansion wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Another reporter, eager for details, pressed further. "What exactly is the relationship between this attack and your support for the president's anti-cartel policies? Was this personal?" Karoline's eyes darkened slightly, her posture growing even more commanding. It wasn't personal, it was political. The cartel doesn't just attack individuals, they attack the very foundation of our nation. They challenge the government's authority, they threaten the lives of innocent people, and they try to undermine our efforts to stop them. My position has always been clear. The fight against cartels is one that I will continue to champion. But this attack wasn't about me. It was about sending a message to the American people. The President's policies are working, and this victory today is proof that we will continue to fight, with every tool at our disposal. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Karoline had just turned the tables on the entire cartel. She had faced down a threat head-on, using the same sharp intellect and political savvy that had earned her the title of the youngest White House press secretary in history. Now, she had used that same precision to dismantle a cartel hit squad. The victory wasn't just hers, it was America's. The media would spin their story, they would ask their questions, but she had already controlled the narrative. The press would report on the victory, they would analyze it, but at the end of the day, Caroline Leavitt had emerged victorious. As the questions continued to come, Caroline answered with the same calm, assured tone. She wasn't just defending her actions, she was reinforcing the message. She was the voice of a new kind of leadership, one that was unyielding in the face of danger, that was willing to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. This wasn't just a political victory, it was a personal one. It was a statement to every enemy, to every cartel member lurking in the shadows, to every critic that doubted her ability to lead. She wasn't afraid, and she wasn't backing down. As the press conference wound down, Caroline felt a small sense of pride. The public had seen her strength. They had seen the mansion transformed from a target into a fortress, a symbol of resilience, and now they would see her lead the charge in Washington. The battle wasn't over, but the war was being won, and in that moment she knew that this victory, her victory, would resonate far beyond the walls of the mansion. It would echo through the halls of Congress, through the streets of Washington, and most importantly, through the hearts of the American people. The cartel had attacked her home, but in the end it was their defeat that would be the story, and Caroline would make sure the world heard it. The aftermath of the press conference was still reverberating through Washington, but Caroline's mind was already focused on what came next. The cameras, the flashing lights, the crowds, all of that was temporary. What mattered now was the message she had sent to the cartels, to the White House, to Congress, and to the nation. The battle in her mansion wasn't just a story about surviving an attack. It was about showing strength, showing resolve, and sending a loud, clear message. No one could break her, and no one would escape her watch. The cartel might have thought they had chosen the right moment to strike, but they had underestimated her. She had turned their raid into a turning point, a rallying cry for a much-needed shift in how the United States confronted cartel violence. She stood by the broken window, gazing out at the quiet yard, the remnants of the battle still visible in the form of yellow tape and scattered debris. The FBI had finished securing the area, and local law enforcement was conducting their final sweeps, but the job wasn't over. Caroline knew that much. As her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sarah Martinez, the special agent leading the FBI's operation, Caroline glanced down and read the brief message with a hint of satisfaction. Mission complete. All cartel members are in custody. The mansion's security measures held up as planned. It's over. The words were simple, but to Caroline, they carried a weight of finality, signaling the end of this chapter. The cartel was dismantled, their attack thwarted, and their leaders now under arrest. Yet Caroline knew that while this battle had been won, the war was far from over. The intelligence gathered in the wake of the attack pointed to more cartel activity lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for an opening. She couldn't let her guard down, not now, not ever. The success of the operation had set a new precedent, one that would change how the cartels viewed not just her, but the entire United States government's stance on cartel violence. Caroline had no intentions of letting that change fade into obscurity. Walking across the room, she sat down at her desk, her fingers automatically reaching for the encrypted communication device the White House had given her for situations like this. She'd been through more than her share of press briefings, tense interviews, and media scrutiny, but this was different. This was an opportunity to leverage this win into something far greater. A victory like this couldn't be an isolated incident. It needed to be part of a larger movement. Karoline picked up the device, dialing the number for the White House's senior policy advisor, someone she had worked closely with throughout her career. As the line connected, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "It's Karoline," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the static of the early morning. "I need a meeting scheduled with the president as soon as possible. We need to move forward with the anti-cartel bill. I'm ready to push it through Congress." The advisor's voice was quick to respond, a hint of admiration in their tone. "Understood. I'll arrange it right away. Your performance today was nothing short of impressive. The president has already been briefed. Expect a call soon." Karoline hung up the phone, her thoughts already racing. She had seen firsthand how much damage the cartels could do. This wasn't just about policy or politics. It was about saving lives, protecting communities, and sending a message that the United States would no longer stand idly by as cartels ravaged their neighborhoods. She had taken the first step in making that message clear, but now she had to ensure it would be heard on the floor of Congress. She needed the momentum, the public support, and the weight of her victory to push the bill forward. The media was already on her side. The world had seen her stand tall, face the threat head-on, and emerge victorious. Now, it was time to turn that into political capital. Karoline sat back in her chair, her mind running through the next steps. She needed to prepare her talking points for the meeting, but she also needed to plan her next move. The cartels wouldn't just sit back after this loss. They would regroup, they would strategize, and they would come after her again. But this time, she would be ready. The mansion had been the proving ground, but it wouldn't be the last. Karoline had already planned upgrades for the security systems, improved jamming capabilities, enhanced surveillance, more advanced tech traps. She was preparing for the worst, but she wasn't afraid. She had learned long ago that fear was the enemy of success, and right now she had no time for hesitation. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a text from Leia. "The tech team has finished the upgrades. Everything is secure. The mansion's defenses are stronger than ever. We're ready for whatever comes next." Karoline smiled slightly, impressed as always with Leia's attention to detail. The mansion, once a simple home, was now a fortress, a symbol of power, a symbol of resilience. But it wasn't just about the walls or the security systems. It was about the team she had built, the network of individuals who stood with her through every storm. Mark, Leia, James. They weren't just allies. They were family. And together, they had made the impossible possible. The meeting with the president was scheduled for later that day, but Karoline had a few hours to prepare. She began drafting her strategy for pushing the anti-cartel bill. The president was on her side, and the public was rallying behind her. But Congress would be a different battlefield. There would be opposition. There would be questions, challenges, and obstacles. But Karoline wasn't intimidated. She had faced down cartel hitmen, used her intellect and strategy to turn the tide, and now she was about to do the same with Congress. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that with the support of the public and the momentum of her victory, she could push the bill through. As the hours ticked by, Karoline prepared for the meeting with the president, making sure she had all the facts, all the figures, and all the support she needed. This was her moment to solidify her place as a force to be reckoned with in American politics. The cartels had attacked her home, but in the end, it was their defeat that would be the story, and she would make sure the world heard it. She wasn't just a spokesperson for the president. She wasn't just a politician. She was a strategist, a leader, and a symbol of resilience. And this was only the beginning. By the time Karoline arrived at the White House, her mind was already racing through her talking points. the strategy she would employ to make the anti-cartel bill a reality. She had already won the battle for public opinion. She had the media behind her, and the victory over the cartel had proven her strength. But now, she had to win over Congress. She knew that with the right strategy, the right allies, and the momentum from her success, she could turn this victory into a lasting change. The president was already in his office waiting to meet with her, and as she stepped through the door, she felt a wave of determination surge through her. She had come this far, and she wasn't stopping now. This wasn't just about defending her home, it was about reshaping the future. It was about showing that the United States could not only fight back against the cartels, but dismantle them piece by piece. And Karoline Leavitt would be at the forefront of that fight.